give you good vibes. Chat Night Africa.
Chat Night Africa. Let's gang up, change mindset, and empower Africans. Are you ready? Africa to the world.
And now, live from the headquarters of Chat Night Africa, Divine Shamiko.
Thank you for deciding to spend part of your evening with us at Chat Night Africa. On Voices of Africa, you and the law. The question now burning a hole in your pocket. Why law matters on Voices of Africa? Here is my answer. While you are not required to attend a law school, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Ladies and gentlemen, by the time we end this broadcast, you will think and talk like a lawyer. On the show this week, we are bringing kitchen table issues, legal issues to address so that you can weaponize yourself. Again, remember, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Ladies and gentlemen, join me now in welcoming high-powered attorney Aneneba Akufo on the platform to take our questions, but also yours. Thank you, lawyer Aneneba Akufo, for accepting to take some hot questioning on Voices of Africa at Chat Night.
Yeah, Mr. Nchamukong, again, the pleasure is mine coming back on Chat Night Africa. It's been a while. And again, thanks for the audience. And hopefully it's going to be a great show tonight. It's a platform I've always been, from its inception, we've been together for a while. And I'm a little bit nervous sometimes coming on your program because the questions are sometimes so searching and far-reaching. But hopefully, with the Almighty's guidance, we should be able to get through with the real answers that would satisfy our audience tonight. So once again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for bringing me on the show.
Lawyer Aneneba Akufo, what goes around comes around. You are used to pounding on people in the courts of law. Today, you are in the court of Voices of Africa at Chat Night. My name is Divine Shamukong. Once again, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Always a pleasure, Mr. Nchamukong.
Lawyer Aneneba Akufo, people drive on the roads every day. What are constitutional protections for road users during police traffic stops?
That particular question, Mr. Divine, it's a very loaded question because if you're looking at the law, long revere is the maxim that with the legal precision of the law, we are guided to safety. So if you look at the law the way it's supposed to be written, then sometimes it defies precision, it defies logic, because the law is not an absolute science. It is something that is arbitrary. Those are rules that we all craft to manage us in our societal dealings with one another. So if you're asking me that question, if somebody is if a motorist is driving on a highway, what are the legal protections? Another way of asking that same question is, if a motorist is on the highway, how is that person supposed to behave themselves in order that they do not injure somebody else? It all goes to the basic concept of duty and care. You see, so when you get out of your home in the morning, you get into your car, you're driving to work. You owe every other passenger or every passenger in your car or every other motorist using the highway that duty of care. Because if you breach that duty, you've hurt somebody, they can actually sue you, so that's an entirely different thing. So where your duty starts It's where somebody else's responsibility begins. So there are constitutional protections, there are individual protections, because I have to be a safe driver. You cannot drive under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or you cannot drive while you're not really able to drive a car. You shouldn't do that, because you put yourself or any other motorist using the same highways or streets that you're using in legal jeopardy. They can be injured, and there's liability for all those things. So, and that's why the Constitution actually protects people, everyone else. Because if I get on the way and you get injured, you don't know where to go. There is no recourse. This is not jungle justice where you just come to me and say, okay, so you hit my car. What are we going to do? Should we go to the insurance, or is there any other recourse besides going to the insurance companies? So there are legal protections, that are bound for you, just depending on the circumstance. So the question you asked me, it's really broad. If we could actually narrow it down to giving specific circumstances or situations, then we'll be able to decipher, what to say and what not to say concerning, motorists using the highway.
Let me specify, Lawyer Akufo. You are driving on the highway. You get pulled over by the police. What are the protections that you have during that encounter with the police, sir?
Well, there is, being pulled over, the one thing you have to understand is there is something called probable cause. There is something called reasonable cause. Before a police officer pulls you over on a highway or on the street or somewhere you're driving, that person has a minimum standard that he or she has to have taken into consideration before pulling you over. It's a reasonable cause. They must have reasonable cause for them to pull you over. Let's say you have a broken tail light, or let's say you're driving above the speed limit, or you have an expired license tag. Okay, they have a reason to stop you, because the cops or anyone deputized to be in the position of a police officer, they cannot just pull you over like that. There is a constitutional protection against that. You cannot do that. So let's say they have reason to pull you over for a traffic violation. Anyone, whether you're on the red light or there is a broken tail light, yes, they have a reason to stop you, and they stop you. They can issue you a citation, and because of that, but they would tell you exactly what happened before they can issue you that citation or things like that. But if you're trying to look at the law of search and seizure, it is totally something different. Whether if they stop you, they can actually search your car. If that's what you're asking, or if that's what you're thinking, that is something totally different, because they stopped you for a traffic violation. They have to cite you for that traffic violation. Just the fact that they stop you, they cannot search your car for drugs. They cannot search your car for a stolen plasma television, because that's not the reason why they stopped you. Or when they stopped your car, they smell marijuana, for example, in your car. Okay, now it has to step over to something different. Now they've smelled something, they have reason to believe that your car is an instrument of criminality because you're smoking a joint inside your car. If that's the situation, okay, they have probable cause now to search your car. And at that moment, something that started just from the basic principle of a reasonable cause develops into a probable cause. So that's how the law works, and I'm sure that's exactly what you were looking for.
Is reasonable cause the same as profiling? If you did not profile somebody, how do you establish reasonable cause?
No, it is not profiling. Profiling is it's a standard, it is something that's against the law. You don't profile people, because profiling is I'm looking at specific people, which is not how it works. There's racial profiling, there is profiling in every form. That's not what the police officer is looking, or the person who is being deputized to execute the law is looking for. No, they're looking for a violation of the law. If you call that profiling, then I don't see that is not profiling. That's not, it is. I know what you're saying, but we trying to discuss the law, the way it's supposed to operate and how it affects society.
Now, you just said, Lawyer Anene Akufo, that the police cannot pull you up because of non-functioning brake lights and then move on to searching your car. Well, but you, the road user, don't know why he stopped you anyway.
No, when they stop you, they will tell you exactly why they stopped you. So if a police officer stops you, they will come to you politely and tell you, say, sir, you were running, this is a 25-mile zone, you were going 50, so you're above the speed limit. They might show you, their camera showing that this is what they caught you on the camera. Or let's say you fail to stop at the stop sign. They would actually tell you that you failed to stop at the stop sign. Or your license plate has expired, your tag has expired. No, they will tell you that it expired. You were supposed to renew your tag in September. Now it's October. Now there is no reason, there is no justification for that. Then they have a reason to stop you. So that is not profiling. They just stood there doing their job, just as you got up in the morning going to work, you were going to do your work. So they realized that this XYZ driving on public highway is not doing what a normal citizen is doing. He or she has a broken tail light. You're supposed to have functional lights, because if you apply your brakes, the motorist coming behind you would know that you're about to stop. So if that light is broken, there is nothing telling me that the person in front of me is about to stop, and I might hit that person. And of course, if you hit somebody from behind, they would say, okay, you were negligent in hitting that person, you might be responsible. So a police officer who sees you with a broken tail light has every reason to stop you. It's a very basic standard, which is a reasonable cause to stop you. But probable cause is a difference. It's much more heightened than reasonable cause.
Lots of women are watching this broadcast. We also know that in the society you have, fugitives who use police lights in their car. You cannot tell, the user cannot tell, the woman driving her car cannot tell whether it's a legitimate police officer or it's a fake. They pull her. The lights are flashing behind her car. What should she do, especially if it's a dark place?
Well, this is when common sense actually comes in. You understand? Because if you're driving on a very secluded highway, a very dark area, and you see police lights flashing, your first instinct is you pull over. I mean, you indicate that you're about to slow by putting up your traffic, your indicator, your light, your double light, that you're about to stop. You slow down. You might just stick your hand out and say, okay, I hear you, put up your double traffic indicators, and you keep moving. And at that moment, the police officer, or the fake officer, as you call him or her, knows that this person is obeying my commands. At that moment, make sure if you're on the phone, you can call 911 and say you've been stopped by somebody that you feel is a fake. Things like that. They know they can actually use their radios, the police officers, they can actually use their radios to actually contact that would-be person who has stopped you, if it's a legitimate officer or not. But in that situation, if you find yourself where it's very dark, on a secluded highway or in a very dark area, all you need to do is drive close to a gas station or in a place that's well lit up where there are people before you stop. You're not really obliged to do it, but slow down, indicate that you're about to stop. Then at that moment, call 911 or call a family member that this is what's going on, and they can actually radio that particular precinct or that jurisdiction, and they should be able to contact that police officer. And if it is a legitimate police officer, they will tell you that it is a legitimate officer, but they will advise you to pull to a lighted area and stop, and then you can be, he gives you the ticket.
The person pulled over, does he or she have the right to ask for the identification of the police officer?
Well, you have every right to ask, because he himself has a right to ask you for an ID. You can also, they would show you their badge. They have a badge, it's right there, and they will tell you, I am Officer XYZ, and that's the badge. And if you determine that, because you don't want to asking them to actually pull an identity card from their wallet, because these are people, it is their duty, to execute the law. And at certain moment, I'm not saying you should not, exercise your right to know who is pulling you over, but just the fact that somebody has pulled you over, you determine that this is a police officer, you have their badge, they have their name right there on the tag, and he pointed, this is it. Again, if you're still not sure if it's a police officer, you can ask for a supervisor. They can call back up and they will come up, and then you can go from there. And if they start asking you questions, then you can respond to them. And at that moment, you really don't have to tell them anything if you're not really sure if this is a police officer. If he refuses to tell you his name or to give you an ID card, he tells you this is a badge and you're still not sure, you can call for a supervisor and they will call for backup. I think if 2 other officers come, then at that moment, you know this is a legitimate stop.
You are watching Voices of Africa at Chat Night. The show today, You and the Law. Again, we're doing this show because ignorance of the law is no excuse. You cannot break the law and before a judge say, well, sorry, sir, I did not know I was breaking the law. I'm sorry. You will be walked out of court into a jail cell in handcuffs. When a police officer pulls you over, say at night or even at any time of the day, there's some questioning between you that will be launched at you. Do you have a right to say you're not answering the question, sir?
Yes, you have every right to say no, not to answering.
That's a police officer. Why shouldn't you answer the questions?
No, the thing is, there's some basic questions that you have to answer, like what's your name and where you're going to and things like that. Those are just basic things. You are not really under police domination and things like that, where you feel that you've been arrested or you feel your Fourth Amendment right has been affected. Then that's the point where, you can answer those basic questions, but there's certain things that if you really don't want to answer, he or she cannot force you. But the Supreme Court has actually said there are situations in which you have the right to, you must answer what, if the questions actually solicit an answer that cannot incriminate you, then there is no reason for you not to answer. Because if I ask you what's your name, there is no reason saying my name is XYZ or my name is, John Doe. You have to just say it. They might ask for your ID. Then you might ask them at that moment, why is it that you're asking for my ID? They will tell you if it's something that you're not satisfied. Again, as I told you, you can always call backup. You can call a supervisor and they will come out and they will tell you exactly why because you see, the thing is, the law of arrest, it's a very broad and very complicated area of the law, because if the police officer has a reason to stop you, there are certain things that they can and they cannot do. They can ask your name. They can ask you where you're going, where you're not going, and you have a right to answer and not to answer. But if, again, as I told you, if it's something that it's supposed to elicit an answer, you must answer it. But if there is a reason for them to stop you, then you must answer those questions.
Unfortunate situations have arisen during police encounters and the public and road users. At what point can the police officer lawfully decide to arrest you, and should you resist the arrest?
So there is something under the United States Constitution called the Fourth Amendment protection, right? So a police officer that stops you, again, it has to be a government officer. It has to be a government official. And in this particular situation, it's a police officer or somebody who's been deputized to stop you. When he stops you, your question is, can they actually, what's your question, whether they can actually search your car or what was the question?
At what point can a police officer lawfully decide to arrest you, and should you resist the arrest? Because nobody feels that they're arrested for the right reasons anyway.
No, I already told you, like, when they can lawfully arrest you. Okay, if they have a reason to stop you, for example, again, the simple example I told you is, there is a traffic violation. They issue you a citation and off you go. But in the course of issuing that citation, I told you, if they realize that there are drugs in your car, there is something called plain view. They can actually look through your glass window, through your windshield, and they see something that they feel, or they think it is their drugs, or it's a gun. They might ask you, okay, do you have a license for that gun lying there on your passenger seat? Who owns the gun? You say it's your gun. Do you have a license for that gun on your lying there on your passenger seat? If you don't have a license, then at that moment they have provided within that particular jurisdiction, you're not supposed to operate a firearm without a license. At that moment, they have every reason to arrest you and take you into custody. So if you are resisting arrest at that moment, and it gets to the point where, you know, the officer is afraid of his or her life, that's when you see people get shot. So the simple reason, if they realize that you have a gun in your possession and you're not supposed to be carrying that gun, you violated the law. Something that static or the basic premise of a reasonable cause now has developed into probable cause. And in that situation, you can be arrested. The officer does not even need a warrant at that moment to arrest you, because this is plain view. Because in every situation, from the premise of your previous question, when are you supposed to be arrested? You know, your privacy, somebody, you have every right to, for your privacy to be respected at every moment. Either your house where you live, your car, your personal luggage, those things are secluded areas where the police officer is not supposed to search. But if it comes to a point where they have every reason to search those things, then there is, they have to do it because there are exigent circumstances. In this situation that I just told you, there's plain view. Or let's say there is a crime in procession. That's a hot pursuit. I'm going there. I don't need a warrant, because to arrest somebody, to do anything, you need a warrant. Number one, it has to be a government officer. Number two, the warrant must come from a neutral and, a neutral magistrate, somebody who is not settling scores. You cannot get a warrant from a prosecutor, because prosecutors do not issue warrants. Warrants are supposed to be given by people who are neutral. But a prosecutor is somebody who is trying to take away your liberty or prosecute you, so he cannot issue a warrant. So if there is a warrant, then they can absolutely search your, the car or your luggage or your house.
We've seen situations that some residents, road users, resist arrest, and unfortunately, the use of force becomes, in some eyes, necessary, in some eyes, unnecessary. Lawyer Akufor, where do you draw the line? Where's the line between reasonable and unreasonable use of force during police action?
It's pardon me laughing, because it is, again, every jurisdiction in the United States, the way they craft their arrest laws, they're quite different from every other state. But there should be a general standard through which, by which somebody can be arrested or force can be used. But all what I always advise people that come into contact with me is, try to not to be belligerent when you are in contact with a law officer, especially if they've told you that you've done something wrong. And subjectively in your mind, that, yes, I've done it wrong. So there is just no reason for you to be bellowing and trying to be arrogant in front of that particular officer, because we are all human. They are human just like you and I. They might become irate because nobody leaves their home to go to work and not do the right thing. Everybody's going to work to do the right thing. But I'm not saying there are no bad people out there. There are cops that they're not really good, or they don't do the right thing rightly. And there are other cops that mistakenly do stuff that ends up escalating in the situation which you're talking about. So if let's take a basic traffic stop where, the police officer approaches your car and tells you that, okay, you violated this particular law, and yes, my tag has expired, and you're telling them that no, your tag has not expired, or it expired, but I didn't have money to renew my license, or things like that. Politely, you could talk to that person. You could be very simplistic and explain to him that this is the process and things like that. He might just write you a citation. But if you become a little bit, sometimes it's just nervousness on the part of the person who has been stopped, because not everybody is used to a law enforcement officer breathing under their necks with a gun holstered around their waist, or you see some ammunition or things like that. You are afraid, so people become nervous and things like that. But try to maintain your calm, and don't try to use force, please. Don't try to do stuff that might escalate a simple issue to become a little bit more hesitant and violent, where you might eventually get hurt. So something that started as a very peaceful thing should not evolve into something that becomes much more violent.
You are watching Voices of Africa at Chat Night. This week, you and the law, and of course, we have lawyer Aneneba Akufo as our guest. Soon we will open the lines so that you can ask him your question. And I am your host, Divine Chamukong. I am anchoring this broadcast from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Before we go on part 2 of the broadcast, this interlude, the ninjas of Uku, Cameroon. Here we go. And this broadcast is going live also on YouTube. We now take on part 2 of the show, and we'll be talking about sexual harassment. Ladies and gentlemen, join me once again in welcoming lawyer Aneneba Akufo. Lawyer Aneneba Akufo, there is no doubt, not even a shadow of doubt, as you people say in the law courts, that women are being violated at workplaces, harassed and raped. It's a sad event. But what the public has continued to ask is, how does it happen that somebody who is harassed sexually doesn't report the case until 20 years, sometimes 30, 40 years after? The question, again, how does the court get to deciding the truth, the veracity of what the woman is saying, just because she says it and smoothly? How do you react to this, sir?
Again, harassment in any other form, it's something that's, again, it's abhorrent, because again, harassment, it's any repeated or uninvited contact that serves no useful purpose by creating alarm, annoyance, or emotional distress on the other party. So that's generally what harassment is, and that's how federal law, defines harassment. But if you're talking about sexual harassment, that's something totally different also, which does not deviate away from what I just told you about how federal law defines harassment in general as a general concept. Sexual harassment, on the other side, it's a legal term created basically for the purpose of protecting one of the sexes against, unlawful, unwanted, and unsolicited approaches that, it's actually debased or, leading to some sort of moral turpitude on their part. So it arises in various forms, like touching somebody, making advances that they don't really want. It has to be like something that's repeated to that other party. The way you put the question is as if sexual harassment just goes from the man to the woman. It is one of those eponymic legal concepts in which the way it is styled, it's monodirectional, because we always presume that sexual harassment, it is something that's from the man to the woman. The reverse is also true. It's just like the other act, which we call the Violence Against Women's Act, that was crafted by Congress, in order to assist women who are victims of violence, domestic violence, or kidnapping, or peonage. Those laws, they say it's Violence Against Women's Act, but if you reverse it, it is also, it applies also to men. If you're a man who finds yourself in a very violent marital situation, you can exploit that particular law. So sexual harassment, we just think it is something from the man to the woman. It is the reverse also. But again, to your question, why is it that the judge, what would make the judge to believe something that has happened more than 20 years ago?
When there's no physical evidence, for example.
Where there is no physical evidence, again, which is very difficult. Number one, first of all, you have to understand there is something called the statute of limitations, which is just a constitutional ground in which, the law becomes inoperable after a certain time has passed without you bringing up that particular case. And again, you have to understand society evolves. Just like in my opening, I told you, the law is arbitrary. The law is not an absolute. Just like when Newton sat down and an apple fell, that's the law of gravity. It fell from the tree and fell on his head. That particular concept has been happening for thousands of years. It's just that we had not got to it. It is inevitable. It is absolute. It will always happen that way. And it will happen everywhere around the world at the same time, at the same pace, and the same thing. So if prehistoric man threw a spear in the air, it will eventually fall down. So it obeys the laws of gravity. Or if man can fly, yes, you can beat the laws of gravity, because you've developed a certain heightened sense of knowledge to beat the laws of gravity. But guess what? At the moment you stop flying, you would drop back. The laws of gravity would come in and you would fall. But with the idea of the laws of society, they are arbitrary, because these are sets of rules and regulations that you and I will sit in our parliaments, in our, in our local councils, or in the justices, courtrooms and all that stuff, and craft them, and they become binding laws and precedents or stare decisis, which we follow every day as a guidance to our society, which makes us safe. So if the law, if you're saying that, why, 20 years ago, certain things that were happening in society were acceptable at that moment, maybe, just tapping a lady on the shoulder like that, it was pretty much acceptable social norms that, they could go on, it did not really offend, but the fact that every other person accepted it, A, for example, did not do it because, they might feel a little bit, out of the norm in society if they said that particular thing to somebody, that, okay, this is what happened to me. So norms, they do change. As society evolves, some of these standards, the way we do things change, and things that were acceptable yesterday, they're no longer acceptable today. So that today, like, the women's rights coming up, and they're manifesting, saying, okay, things that men are doing to us today, no, we can no longer tolerate that. Okay, in the past, they were tolerant. But if these things had happened 20 years ago, you bring it up today, it becomes a little bit obsolete for you bringing it up today. Number one, the time has passed. And number two, society has changed. And those things, it's quite different from what's happening today.
What's the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault, sir?
Well, harassment is just the assault is actually the act itself. An assault is, you have this premonition that something is going to happen to you, and you feel that it's like, let's say I hold a, I take a sledgehammer and I shove it towards you. You have that premonition that I'm about to hit you. That's an assault. But if it hits you, that's a battery because it actually touched you. So a sexual assault is, something you approach me, and I feel subjectively within me that this is a standard, that it's not. Let's say you're coming to kiss me on my cheek. You've never done that. You are not my partner. We're not that close. For me, that's an assault because you're violating my personal privacy, something that I'm not expecting it from you. We are just co-workers. All we do is say hi to each other. We don't go to the level where, you kiss me on the cheek or you tap me on my, on a very, sensitive part of my body, which you're not supposed to do. For me, that's an assault, and so I think that's what you're asking. Sexual assault, that's an assault right there.
If you give compliments to a lady, hey, you look really hot, you look sexy, it's a common word we just throw around. Could that be interpreted as sexual harassment?
Well, again, what I said in the opening was this should be repetitive conduct. Once in a while, if you meet a coworker, you say, wow, that your hairdo is so beautiful. That's it. But if you keep doing that on and off, tomorrow you see her lipstick, or he sees you wearing you see her. It just depends, again, how the other person perceives it. And what I will always advise people is, if you feel uncomfortable with that type of conduct, all you need to do is tell the other person, thank you so much, but you don't really have to be saying this over and over. It should stop at that moment, because if you keep doing that, it becomes aggressive, because you're putting me under emotional distress, because I really don't want those compliments coming from you again, because I've already told you I don't feel comfortable about it. So at that moment, you have to stop. If you persist, then all I have to presume is, that's, for me, that's an assault. It's violence, it's harassment.
If it persists, who is the woman suing? Let's assume at this point that is the woman that's being harassed. Is it the person harassing her, or her employer, or their employer?
Well,
if their employer, why should the employer be responsible for the actions of an employee?
Not that the employer directly, the employer is not the one responsible for that, because it is you, the aggressor, who is responsible. The thing is, why employers get involved is if you create an environment where those things, they're very tolerant, or there is management, you don't create, those exit valves where people can actually go seek redress, then that's when the employer, or even gets, brought into the whole malaise. Or in a situation where, during your training manuals, you don't bring somebody like a specialist to tell the employees what advances they should not make to the opposite sex, then they should know that already. So if the employer has not really taught their employees what to do and what not to do in the workplace. So for example, if you see a lady, you should not touch her on her lap, or if a lady sees a man, you should not do this, or certain advances, you should not say those things to people that make them uncomfortable. Don't say, okay, your lipstick looks nice, or things like that, your hair. Again, if you say it once, 2 times. So it is the environment itself that the employer creates. If the teaching there, if the manuals, the teaching manuals, or they bring specialists to teach their people what to do and what not to do within a workplace, if they are void, then that's when, the employee, the person who has been harassed can not only sue the harasser, but also bring the employer also into it, because, the harasser is an agent of that particular employer, and he was doing all this. He was doing it within the course of his business, because let's say those same two people, they met after hours at a party somewhere, and that very employer, decides to do the same thing to this lady, and she perceives that to be violence or harassment. You cannot really sue the employer at that moment, because this is not within the workplace. this is personal, this is outside. He is not acting in, or he's not within his duties or his functions as an employee of that organization at that moment. They are private citizens, so you cannot bring the employer.
Here's a question just texted me. It brings us to the home, husband and wife. Are there situations that a woman could complain of rape by her husband or sexual harassment? If yes, could you explain how the law handles this, or how the law would understand that to be criminal?
Well, not really. Well, it can be criminal, it can be civil, but again, yes, you can rape somebody with whom you are in love. That is absolutely true, because what is rape? It is just, a forceful sexual act when the other person does not really want it, or they're not prepared for it. The fact that they're your partner or the fact that they're your wife doesn't necessarily mean that you have to violate their person because you are the husband and she is the wife. It's a vice versa also. The other party cannot do it. So, it just goes to the basic principle where everybody's body is inviolable. You cannot just do it because you are married as husband and wife. And yes, if you do that, whether you're the husband, you're the wife, yes, they can actually make a case against you. It's just that it happens most of the times within, marital couples or girlfriends and boyfriends or lovers. They just decide, just for the sake of the fact that they just want to maintain their unity or the purpose of their relationship, they decide to shove it under the rug and move on. But that it is an act of violence against the other party, it is true, and they have a cause of action, and it's an actionable cause, and you can seek redress with the court, and the other person will be punished for that.
You and the law, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Again, I want to inform our viewers that you can text your questions, your law questions, or now the phone line is open, 240-603-7367. Let me repeat, 240-603-7367. This question about the workplace, but not about sexual harassment. Usually, lawyer Anindaba Akufo, when people take up a job, one of the clauses of the employee, whatever they sign, the papers is you can be fired with or without cause. If you signed that, can you turn around at any point when you're fired, if you are fired and complain of wrongful termination? If yes, in what circumstances, for example?
Well, there is something in the United States law. I mean, it's at will employment, which almost every state beside, I think the last time I looked was the only state was Montana that does not have it. At will employment means the employer can fire you anytime with no reason, unless it is illegal. That's the only time that you can seek recourse or redress. And the reverse is the corollary of that is also true. You can also walk out of that job without recourse. You don't even have to tell the employer. I mean, you can just politely tell them that you can walk into the office in the morning and tell them that, you know what, I'm done with this job. I'm tired, I'm frustrated, or have something else to do. And you pack out, they would not sue you for that, except it becomes illegal or you're violating the terms of your contract, as you told me. So when you sign an employment contract, it is, again, it's an employment contract. It's a contract between you and your employer. So, and what it is saying is you cannot wrongfully terminate me in violation of that particular contract. In that situation, yes, they cannot really do that because it is illegal to do that. But again, as I said, the employer or the employee, you can leave. The employer can always fire you without any reason, unless it is illegal. Illegal, like you're violating the law, like the civil rights laws, the Title VII, the Wage Adoption Act and all that stuff, or you're violating the terms of the contract itself. Those are the only times where they cannot actually fire you. But if you read the contract and there is something that the employer has done wrong by firing you, you can bring action against that particular employer. That is where the law comes in.
if you signed something with your employer, what if also what you signed violates the law, but you signed because you're not a lawyer? And so would the employer just say that, well, you signed this and so it binds you?
Well, again, as you always say, you yourself, you say ignorance of the law is not a defense. So the thing is, you signed the employment contract because you needed that job. The fine print is there. If you really want to abide by that, you can always take it to somebody else who can interpret that legal writing to see where your protections start and where your protections end. So the fact that you did not understand it, it is not really the fault of the employer, because there is just nothing very, I know sometimes lawyers themselves, I just want to let you know you're not alone. Sometimes lawyers themselves, they find it difficult reading some of those contracts because they are so convoluted, and the pages, you know, they're like 600-700 pages of employment contracts, or 39 pages of employment contract with legalese and some fine prints in such a way that would obsolete acts or acts that have been revived and renewed. And you find it extremely difficult as a regular citizen to go through it. But the basics of all those contracts would be spelled out for you, in spite all the technicalities of the employment contract. And if you feel that you're not really understanding it, it is still your duty to go back to your employer and say, I still don't really understand this employment contract. And they have every reason to sit you down. They have a legal department. They can go to their legal department and thin down that contract into very seamless language in which you and I can understand and move on with that.
A question just came in the event of a divorce, and this question is very important. Bad things do happen to good people. In the event of a divorce, what determines who gets what property?
Okay. Thanks for that question also. You know, it also depends in which jurisdiction you are, because there are two ways in which you can answer that particular question. There is something called a community distribution of property in times of divorce, and there is an equitable distribution of property after, during the. And I'll explain both of them to you. During a divorce proceedings. And of course, divorce is when, the parties have, they can no longer cohabit as husband and wife. They decided to call it quits. You go your way, I go my way. But the thing is, what becomes of the property that we had amassed during the marriage? What becomes of that? In terms, when I talked of community and equitable distribution of property, now you're looking, first of all, what property is distributable during divorce proceedings. Let's say I'm married to B, but before I came into that particular union, I had inheritance of a home that was my individual property. My spouse had their individual property. That was something totally different before we came into that particular relationship. Or they had a bank account of $1 million inside that account. I had my own bank account with $300,000, or nothing inside my own bank account before we came into that relationship. And this is where it's very important for prenuptials to come in, so that you decide right there. Prenuptial meaning, excuse me, the agreement that would decide or define who takes what at the time of divorce. It's good for people to always do those prenuptial agreements, before they go into marriage. But absent the prenuptial, the property that you brought into the relationship is your individual property. So at the time of divorce, the house that I had before I came into that relationship would be my sole house. The $1 million that I had before I came into that relationship would be my $1 million. Your 500,000 francs that you came with into that relationship becomes yours at the time of divorce, except there is something called passive appreciation, in which during the course of that relationship, let's say the house that you had before you came into that relationship, we filed our taxes, joint taxes as a married couple, and we used part of that money to renovate that house. We spent about $300,000 to add another section to that house, which upgraded that house from $1 million mansion to about $3 million mansion. So at the time of divorce, what the lawyer would do, what the judge would do is they would proportionally go into those, and see exactly what that level of appreciation because of our joint effort has been, and take that out and make that, bring that as joint property and do it at the time of divorce. So equitable distribution would be based on what we have done during the course of the marriage. But there are certain things that they're not distributable. Let's say during the course of the marriage, before we came to the relationship, I had a JD. Now I have a doctorate degree in law, and you have moved on. You have an MBA in economics. You cannot split a certificate, although it was our joint effort during that process. You cannot say, okay, because you have a doctorate degree in law, let's split the certificate. You take half, I take half. No, it doesn't work that way. But we're only looking at material property in that relationship. Let's say you acquired stocks using your money. We have to go and equitably split the stocks, according to, our all level of contribution towards acquiring those stocks. But during that marriage, if I acquired something by gift or by device, from inheritance from my father or from my mother, that is not something that would be distributable at the time of divorce, because that's my individual property, although it is acquired during marriage.
Lawyer Aneneba Akufo, there are situations when you have somebody working and one person not working. Let's say the man is working, making 6 or 7 figures. The wife is at home. If the man constructed or built a business, and the argument is made, why should the woman be part of it or have equitable distribution when she contributed nothing to it?
Why should she not?
She was at home. That's the argument from someone.
Well, again, which is very naive and, non-forward moving, because she was at home, she was keeping the home. She was at home, she was your partner. She was at home and she was doing things that you could not do. Every time you came back home, there was food at the table. Every time you came back home, you had a loving partner that was waiting for you to come back home. And let's say you even have kids in this relationship, she was taking care of the kids at home. She did stuff that just that emotional well-being that she presents at home, making the home, comfortable for you itself. It's something that you cannot even pay in terms of money. And it is because of that love, that nurturing, that comfort that you're able to go back out there and execute the level of success that you've had in building that business. Just the mental clarity that you have living home. You get up in the morning, she got up before you, she made coffee, she makes it, you take it, you're taking it and you're drinking while you're going to work. That is gratifying. And those are things that, you really cannot compartmentalize in, when you're getting a divorce. You cannot come at that moment and say, okay, she was just a sit-home mother doing nothing and, watching TV all day, not doing anything. No, you cannot do it that way. She was part of you, and, she is entitled to the same, if it's a $700 million business that you've built, the judge will go in there and get the proportion of the contribution. Maybe you borrowed money, the judge will take that into consideration and take that proportion to pay the loans and all that stuff. But that you should not equitably distribute the proceeds of that business because the woman was a stay-at-home mom. I think it just defies all logic of law.
You are watching Voices of Africa at Chat Night, and my guest tonight taking questions is lawyer Aneneba Akufo. Lawyer Akufo, the reason I thought we should do a show on law matters is because oftentimes, people break the law without knowing that they really are breaking the law. Unfortunately, all of us are not required to go to law school, or we're privileged to go to law school like you. Sometimes we say things without knowing that we're breaking the law. Sometimes you're playing with a female colleague in the office, not knowing that you are crossing the line already. So we decided to empower our viewers on matters of the law. In this country, immigrants with green cards, some had green cards and then became U.S. citizens. But you lawyers argue that those things are not irrevocable. In what circumstances could one's citizenship or green card be rescinded?
It is not that we lawyers say they're irrevocable. It is just the law states what happens if you are, if you're a naturalized citizen of the United States, or if you are a legal permanent resident of the United States, and what would happen that you might lose your status, especially if you are a legal permanent resident. If, let's say you have a green card, which is what you're saying, and, you're busted with drugs, depending on the quantity, that's a federal crime. That's a federal statute. It's, those are things that will get you sent out of the United States. So it's you're violating the Controlled Substance Act of the United States, which is a federal offense. And if you're punishable, then you will be sent out of the United States because of that. Or if you shoplift, for example, which is a felony based on the level of conviction at that moment, then you will be sent out of the United States. The only time where it becomes very difficult for them to revoke whatever status they've given you is when you are a United States citizen, because the burden has to be overwhelming for them to revoke your citizenship. But in terms of your green card, oh no, it's very as soon as there is a notice to appear has been issued to you, automatically your green card is gone. Let's say you violated the law and you went to state court and you were convicted and sentenced to a year and above. That's it. If immigration decides to take you into custody, at that moment, your green card is gone. You no longer own that green card. It is the immigration judge will have to reinstate that green card. And, and until that's done, you are a green card less person. And if you don't win the case at the immigration court, then they would send you back to your home country, absent any other exigent circumstances that might be used to tamper it down and let you stay back in the United States. So again, it is very easy for that to be done, except you are a United States citizen.
Lawyer Akufo, we have seen lately so many immigrants from Africa losing cases in immigration courts. Is it because of bad lawyering or fictitious claims of asylum, or what's going on?
Well, to a certain extent, sometimes it is both. Not really bad lawyering. Lawyering is the word, it's a verb. And sometimes it is just people in the neighborhoods that pretend they claim to be lawyers and they do stuff that's not in consonant with the law, and people believe them and they end up not winning their cases. And of course, you have frivolous asylum cases too. People just walk across the border and they tell you things that does not really, because to win an asylum case, you must establish that you are being persecuted and you're afraid to go back, and there are some certain grounds that your case has to fit into, and there must be a direct correlation between what you're saying and what one of those grounds are. Whether you are being persecuted because of your race, your religion, your sexual orientation, your nationality, or you belong to, there's a catch-all group called a member of a particular social group. So if you don't belong to any of those, then your asylum claim will be toast. But most people don't know that. And what I always advise people is try to talk to somebody who does this type of work before you even speak to an immigration officer. But unfortunately, by the time most of them talk to an attorney, they've already condemned themselves by telling the immigration officer why they came to the United States, and it doesn't fit any of the grounds, because you cannot it's not like, I'm not saying it's forum shopping, but you cannot be trying to shop cases and make it amenable to you. You have to tell them what the case is, because if you came across from Panama, went through Ecuador, went through Mexico, and came to the United States, you could have filed for asylum in Mexico, you could have done it in Panama and things like that. But if you decided to come to the United States, you must have a reason. and you must speak to somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. But if you talk to your brother or to your neighbor in, with whom you were living in Cameroon, he or she is now in the United States, and they told you this is what they said, and they were given asylum in the United States, maybe, again, they said it and you understood it differently, and you said the same thing to the asylum officer or to the immigration officer, and they said, no, it doesn't, it doesn't augur to the level of giving you relief in the United States. Then you will lose your case and you go back home.
Most times, or as I hear, let me put it that way, many people file asylum cases based on political claims or political persecutions in their home country. What constitutes political persecution, sir?
Well, again, as I always say, it has to be something that's coming from you. It is you who has been persecuted. It is not a group of people. If it's a group of people, you are part of that group, and you are identified. You are distinct. You are immutable. It means if you move from Bamenda, you go to Yaoundé, they would know you. If you move from Bamenda, you go to Garoua, they would know you. If you move from Bamenda to Ndu, they will still know this person is, this is that person who belongs to this particular group. You understand? So it's a subjective assertion. It is not objective. That's not how they look at political persecution. It's something directly that involves you. You, Mr., let's say, Mr. Agor, what's your role when you say you've been persecuted in Cameroon? What was your role? What was your position in that particular? If it's a political party, what was your role? Were you a secretary in that party? Were you just a ground person? What did you do? Were you distributing party literature, or were you organizing conferences in which the police, when they see you all the time, they would know that this person is going to do exactly what the government does not want? Is the government persecuting you because of that? Just the fact that the government says you should not do it does not amount to persecution. They must have done something that's contrary to international norms, or contrary to, the laws of, participatory democracy. If they do that, let's say they lock you in jail, or, you are being tortured, beaten and jailed 1, 2, 3 times. Yes, that amounts to a level of torture. That amounts to a level of persecution, because it is meted against you. Have you decided to flee from that area? Let's say you live in Bamenda. Have you decided to go to Douala and continue with the same activities? If you go to Douala and they still do the same things, okay, yes. Now, you are somebody that can easily be identified, because you're Mr. Agor, the chief, the chief whip. Whenever those people organize their occasions, they know you wherever you go. That's political persecution right there, because of a political ideology in you.
Granting that somebody has been given political asylum in the United States based on a certain storyline that was told in court, in immigration court, is it possible for that? I mean, do they investigate? Could be found to be a lie, and then your asylum revoked?
Well, it has to be very extreme, for real. It has to be very extreme for them to come back after they've granted you that relief, from persecution from a foreign country, to go back again and take it back again. It's extremely rare, except there was something egregious about what you said, and they rarely go back to investigate all that stuff, except there was some criminal conduct involved in granting that asylum relief to you, that they might, except something triggers it again for them to go back to revisit your case file. Because you have to understand, once they're done, they close your file, they grant you that relief. There is no reason for them to go back, except there is something that occurs again in the future that triggers them to go back to reopen your case file. They might go back, they may not. Or the law, some rogue, let me not call them rogue, attorney generals might decide to do it, like the first attorney general for Mr. Trump, Jeff Sessions. He had to go back again about 7 years behind to revisit the law, and he actually revoked citizenship for certain, types of immigrants, non-immigrants who came to the United States, and they lost their citizenship. He did that, but most people do not really know that, based on there's something, again, I gave you 5 instances of, seeking asylum. There is one called members of a particular social group, which is a catch-all group. And most people from Latin America, especially from El Salvador and Honduras and all, they were coming here with domestic violence, and that gave them the right to be here. So he went back and said, no, that's not a ground for asylum, and went back and revisited a particular case. And based on that case, came back again and just stopped it, and they were not issuing that. But that particular incident has been returned again back to normal with the current administration.
There is a case which Cameroonians are following very closely in the United States. It involves people who are being indicted for illegally, as they say, illegally sending arms to Africa. When does it become illegal for somebody to send arms to Africa, and what could be a consequence of that kind of an action if the person being accused before a court of law is a U.S. citizen, or that's naturalized U.S. citizen, or a green card holder?
Well, again, either of them, it's it's a federal offense, first of all, because you're not only in, violating the arms law, but even the Commerce Clause itself, you're violating the Commerce Clause because you're involving yourself in commerce without a license to do it, it's a felony under United States law and United States Code. So if you're doing that without they're not saying you should not export arms to foreign countries or to foreign agents, but you have to have a license to do that. So if you don't have a license to do it, then you're violating the law. And if you're violating the law, then, you'll be subject to the laws of the United States. I don't really know how the particular circumstances under which this particular incident you're talking about, I don't really have the details about it. I've heard about things like that, but I don't know the details, and so it's not something I can actually comment on. But again, it's the arms laws of the United States, they're very strict. And if you was, negotiating or selling things, paraphernalia or arms out of the United States without a license, then you'll be subject to the laws, and they are very draconian.
Attention. Attention.
A question from one of the viewers: do you have a right to sue your employer? And this is very topical. Do you have a right to sue your employer if he insists you must take the COVID-19 vaccine to keep your job?
I don't really think so that you can. This is an area of the law in which a lot has not really been, has not really evolved. I remember when the Congress was trying to pass this, I think that was the second stimulus package, when the former president was still in power. They actually delayed it because they wanted to write laws into that particular act in such a way that it would make it difficult for employees to sue their employers. Let's say they attend work and they get the COVID at work. Can they sue their employers? No, they made it in such a way that it becomes difficult for people to do it because, it will just create a wash of lawsuits. People will just go get sick and that's suing employers. And that's not really what you want. Not that you don't have a right. You have a right to sue, but, what law will you invoke to do that? It's just like you have a flu. You have a flu and you say, okay, I caught it at work because my coworker had a flu. Now I have to sue my employer for compensation for that. But if the employer is forcing you to take a vaccine, it is because they want to protect the other employees. It is not really forcing you that, you have a right not to attend. You have a right to resign and deny not to take the vaccine and deny not to not to go to that particular place of work again. But what most employers do is they make it in such a way that if you're not vaccinated, they can put a system of testing. Let's say every week you have to submit proof that you've tested negative for the COVID-19 virus. If you keep submitting those until it becomes so burdensome for you not to be able to do it, then you no longer want to go to that job again. So, but again, they would not. I think government would not let you do that because it would just create a wash of lawsuits, and that would bring down the economy again.
And this is Chat Night Africa, Voices of Africa Chat Night from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. My guest is lawyer Aneneba Akufo. From the way he handles the topic, you can agree with me. Yes, he's one of the best of African descent in the United States. He's thorough, he's explicit. I mean, he is to the point. I was wondering, sir, when I asked you to come talk on this, take my questions, I was wondering whether you would talk at a level that people can understand. Let me ask you this question, sir. Why is it that you lawyers in the law court get very aggressive when cross-examining people on the other side? What is it? What are you trying to achieve?
No, the thing is, you're not being aggressive. You're just trying to be, you're just trying to be zealously represent your client. That's what it is. You're not. It's just the zeal you want to get anything out of, because you have to understand that you're looking at the evidence on the other side, and you're looking at what your client has, and you're trying to poke holes on the other person's what they've said on cross-examination. In that particular situation, you have to be forceful. When you think it's aggressive, it is just being overzealous, which is just a legal way of, saying you are aggressive. And I believe what you're saying, because the evidence every piece of evidence is relevant, except it becomes something that it's unduly burdensome on the other side or on your particular side. But if you have every means or every reason to expose the other side's weakness on that evidence, you have to do it because you're trying to protect your own client,
Here's a question that just came in. Mm-hmm. Why is it that in the United States system of law, there is this jury system? There is you bring people who've never read law to come interpret law and convict somebody? What's the logic behind that? That's a question I just got.
Well, the thing is, yes, this is an age-old debate. People have debated this for centuries. Why do they bring juries? People who are just not knowledgeable in the law. It's just the same as you say. But
and for somebody who is understanding this, please could you explain what jury is?
I will.
Okay,
yes, that's fine. And again, it's just like somebody will say, but a police officer who has never studied the law, you give that person the gun and he can actually take away life, based on a very flimsy excuse without really knowing what they're doing, but based on a very thin reason, which if you look at, it's veiled under ignorance, and a life has been taken. Whereas a prosecutor, a judge, or a lawyer, they don't have that power to carry a gun to execute the law. So it's the same with the jury system. A jury is just like it's just members of the society that we choose, to indict somebody and to hear the evidence and decide if someone is guilty or somebody is not guilty. So there are two types of jury. You have a grand jury, and you have the very thinned down version of the grand jury, which goes up to like 12 persons who actually decides what the case is. The grand jury is where you bring the summary of all the facts and the evidence. Everything is at play at that moment. They will look into all the facts that you bring in the court, what the other party brought and what the prosecutor has brought, and determine if this is something that it arises up to a level where they can take it before the judge. They can throw it out at that level, but it doesn't stop you from bringing it back on again, like you, the prosecutor, if it's been thrown away from the grand jury, because this is just people that has been assembled to hear the case, and there is, during that process, then after the grand jury has determined that, okay, there is an offense that it can go before for trial, then you decide now to convene a real jury of 12 people, most of the times it is 12 people. And, the questionnaires. The question is, these are people, they're not learned in the law. They are not lawyers. You take people who, some have not even graduated from high school. Some are high school. Some of them are even, some people in that mix of the jury, they're people who are so knowledgeable also. But you mix all of them together and they would decide the future of somebody who might lose life, or lose their liberty for life, based on just, 3 weeks of sitting and listening to evidence from other parties. And the question have always been, people have always asked for centuries of it. What gives these people that particular right to decide it at that level? And the answer is the way the legal system has been threaded in most functioning advanced democracies, and one of them, which is the United States here, is the questions that they table to the jurors, to these people, members of the jury, this 12, people, is they thin it down to very basic, understandable language. They're not really deciding on, what the law is. They're just looking at the evidence and saying, did this arise up to the level of, what the judge told us to go by? They're not really looking, they're not lawyers. They're not looking at the law. It is the evidence that they're looking at. So, for example, the lawyer instructs the jurors that if A shot B because he was afraid of his life, then don't find him guilty. That is all. They're not telling you, go look into the law, whether the self-defense law of that state is X, Y, Z. But during the process of lawyers making their arguments and cross-examinations and recrosses, the jurors, they listen, and they go back, they deliberate, because they have a four-person who, goes back again, and sometimes they reconvene, and they have to go through that, and they read the jurors' instructions from the judges, and instructions that have been written by both the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, to thin it down in, reasonable standards in which they can understand. So at that moment, when they come out, they're only answering yes or no. Did this arise up to the level where this person can be convicted? It is yes. They're not saying, was the law right or the law is wrong? That's not where they're there to do it. That's why they can do it.
Understood, sir. Can a guest at your party sue you because you served them too much alcohol and they got involved in an accident while driving back home?
It is very possible. And if you're looking at that particular question, you're looking at the social host liability laws on your state. Other states called it the drum shop laws, following the 19th century drum, liquor stores and taverns. That's how that law, drum shop laws, came about. Then it evolved into something called social host liability laws. Yes, if you serve excessive alcohol to people at your, let me put it this way. The drum shop laws was basically for taverns and for bartenders, so if you see somebody who is visibly drunk and you serve them alcohol and that person goes out and gets involved in an accident, the third party can actually come after the bar owner. Then they brought it down to social hosts. Let's say you organize a party at your home and you serve alcohol, but most of the times it is when you serve alcohol to somebody who is under 21, that is no go. You would be liable if that person gets involved in an accident. But let's say you serve alcohol to somebody who is over 21 and they go outside and cause an accident. There are two ways to look at it. There is a first party, there's a third party. The first party being the person to whom you serve the alcohol. It's very rare for them to come back after you that you served them alcohol and they went outside and got an accident, unless it got to a point where they could not really drink and they ask, let's say, for water, and you give them more alcohol. At that point, they can come back after you, and yes, you violated, because they're looking at a duty of care. You violated that duty of care, and there was a breach, and there was a causation, and there were damages. So in that particular situation right there, they can come after you. But there is also a third party. A third party can also come after you because you serve that you, the patron at that home, you serve that person alcohol, and they got into an accident. There is a case in I think up in Pennsylvania or Massachusetts where, like the first party case where, somebody was served excessive alcohol during a house party. Then at a certain point, he asked for Alka-Seltzer, the water, to try to dilute it. And they served that person more alcohol. And he drove out and went and hit the car on a tree and became a quadriplegic. Yes, they gave him $6 million because that house party, under the social host laws of that state. So Massachusetts. So you have to look at the laws of your state and see what they are.
The last question for the evening is this. Sent me by text. It concerns medical malpractice. When you go to do, for example, surgery, the doctor throws the textbook in your face and you have to sign certain things. I don't know what you call that. But if something went wrong during that surgery, would the doctor say, well, sorry, you signed for this and so I'm not liable? On what grounds can you sue for medical malpractice, sir?
Where malpractice is, if you don't do what is expected of you in your profession, that's malpractice. It happens everywhere, not just medical malpractice. It's just that it's sometimes very common with some professions than others because the consequences are so vile. So what we look in medical malpractice, excuse me, is the type of level of care that an ordinary prudent healthcare worker is supposed to provide to an ordinary member of society. So an ordinary prudent person would look, let's say you put some stitches in somebody, or let's say you do an operation and you, in the course of sewing up that person, you leave a sponge inside their body. An ordinary prudent person of that same level of education and, technical know-how would not have done that would not have committed that negligent act. So that's malpractice. And, not only doctors are held to that level, nurses themselves are held to that level. Anyone who provides medical, care is held to that level also. Even the facilities themselves, they are, because these are very structured programs or, persons, and they're just certain things that they cannot do because of the level of education that they've gone through and the consequences, of course, of what has happened. And sometimes what blurs with medical malpractice is some of the consequences. You don't even see them right away. So by the time you see it, it's already gone past the statute of limitations period. Because the standard malpractice cases is like 2 years after the injury was caused. So let's say you go to the doctor today and they did an operation, you had a surgery and they left a needle in your body and you don't know that. Like 3 years after that, you feel a pain and you go back again and you realize that 3 years ago they did a surgery on you and that's what's causing the pain right now. But the limitation period has passed. Can you sue? Of course, yes, you can, because now we're not looking at the date of causation, we're looking at the date of discovery, because they discovered it right now, because a prudent, careful person would not have known that something was forgotten in their body during that operation. It is only now that it's been discovered. So with the date of discovery, the statute of limitations begins again. So within 1 year, just depending on your state, within 1 year, you have to also bring a lawsuit against what had happened 3 years ago.
You've been phenomenal. I mean, you tackle virtually every area of law so instructively. I begin to wonder, are you an immigration lawyer, a criminal lawyer, or, I mean, what kinds of cases do you accept to take to court or to defend in court, sir?
Well, again, without getting into legal malpractice, because we also get into malpractice also.
Oh, really?
Yes, of course we do. We do. So yes, I live in Georgia. I have a New York license. I'm a licensed attorney up in New York, but I live in Georgia. So I'm not a locally licensed attorney down here in Georgia. So I all I do in Georgia is federal immigration law, which I can do all over the United States, which I do. But if I were to find myself in New York, what I just told you all about, like malpractice, social host liability, safe driving, and all that stuff, yes, I can do that up in New York, but I cannot do that here in Georgia. And of course, when you say I'm just saying stuff like that, it's because I read it all the time. The law is something, as I said, it evolves all the time. It's progressive, so you have to stay on it. You have to read all the time. New decisions from the Supreme Court and even your district courts. You have to be aware of that, because if you're not, then you'll be thrown behind, and again, you would fall back.
And how can you be contacted? Those all over the United States watching you, how can they reach you if they had concerns? Maybe they wanted a lawyer. How did they reach you?
Well, I do have a website, which is, my middle name is Innocent, just like the word innocent, INNOCENT. So, and again, that's the name of my website, innocentlaw.com. So if you go to that website, www.innocentlaw.com, you can contact me, especially on immigration issues, and I would answer your questions well. And if it's other areas of the law, I mean, I would guide you and direct you where to go. I have friends who do stuff in other states. I can tell you to contact them. But again, you can always contact me through my website. We do have a phone number, 678-675-0395. But again, I'm always amenable and always ready to assist my people.
Let me repeat the phone number, 678-675-0395. If you want to contact this lawyer, a brilliant guy. I mean, you have seen him yourself. 678-675-0395. And before you go, sir, your last word.
Again, just to caution our brothers and sisters, we are far away from home. This society we all find ourselves here not out of our own volition. Sometimes, I mean, because the resources that we wanted in our home country could not really get us where we were, so we found a much more safer ground to be. And I was advised, people to respect the laws of the area where they are, the jurisdiction where they are, the way we do things, just like you were talking about the sexual harassment laws. 20 years ago, things that were done, they were tolerable in society then. Now they're no longer tolerable. Things that we did back home, you cannot do that here and go without being punished. So I just want us to be respectful of the law, respect and treat each other with kindness, and look on each human being as, as you want to be looked upon also, because we are each other's keeper, and whatever we keep here is what we would sow. And we just find a way so that we can evolve and make it good, so that we can go back home and do something better for our own society.
I want to thank you, lawyer Aneneba Akufo. I want to extend my thanks also to your loving wife. The saying goes that behind a strong man is a very strong woman. I'm sure this brilliance of yours wouldn't shine the way it does if you didn't have that terrific, fabulous wife. Thank you, Madam Grace Aneneba Akufo, for supporting this brilliant gentleman. I want to thank you, Lawyer Akufo. You see the platform looks different. This is not how we started Chat Night. You know that. We're on the phone doing this thing very amateurishly, but because of the support that has come from you and many others, we are able to be very competitive in social media, and that's why you have this quality of audio-visual broadcast. I thank you, sir.
Now, it's always the pleasure is mine, Mr. Chamokong. As I said, we have to look at each other. Some of us would excel more than others, but you shouldn't take that as a burden on yourself. Take that as a way for you to share, to help each other, because when we seek justice, we sometimes sacrifice logic and precision, because that's the only way you can make a society functional. And we have to help each other, because the line you leave behind here is something that you want tomorrow to look much more better than what you are. And the more we build ourselves as a unit here in the United States, the better, because again, we leave children here, we leave property, and you want them to be in good hands when we leave. So, I mean, when you called me initially about Chat Night Africa, Mr. Divine, I had known you back in Cameroon. And when you told me things like this, I knew, yes, you're a serious person. There was no reason for me to even hesitate to doubt that you were not up to the task. We just had to jump on board you've been true to it. And again, I really appreciate what you've done. And thank you so much for keeping the community tight.
Thank you again, sir. And we will have another opportunity to bring you on to answer some strong questions. You are used to that anyway in courtroom. So you are used to that. Thank you, sir.
No problem. My pleasure.
And before we go, the tradition is for us to celebrate. Happy birthday to Celestine Mwafo. Happy birthday to Mercy Ma. And happy birthday to Dr. Alain Lekubu. And that's how we say goodbye. Thank you for watching the broadcast. My name is Sir Divine Chamokong. I will be back again for yet another volcanic broadcast. Thank you to my producer, who is thousands of miles away in Lagos, Nigeria. He's producing this broadcast from Nigeria. You can also watch this broadcast on our YouTube channel. It's been broadcasting there live. I want to thank you for your friendship. I do not take your friendship for granted. Again, my name is Divine Chamokong. And that is how we go. Bye for now.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm coming to get down. I'm coming to dance, We're gonna dance, we're gonna get down, we're gonna party hard. We're gonna boogie woogie, and when we jam, it's out of sight. This song right here, it's dynamite. I'm ready.